you know, I try, and I always keep trying. But it's like, I'm at the point now where it's like, why do I even bother? Like, for what? You know? I'm still in the same house, same situation, same position. Still, everything's still the same. For the most part, it's just been me against the world. It's just been me fighting an uphill battle with a big rock on my back, you know, while I'm seeing that don't deserve half of anything. Now they're getting a free ride to the top. The whole premise of the Terminator movies is that, you know, everything's rigged against you. There's no hope for humanity. You know, we're on the brink of extinction. You know, these machines are unstoppable, killing machines that can't be beaten, can't be outsmarted. But yet, humanity still tries to fight to the end. And I know it's a movie, but it's, you know, I like to think sometimes, you know, I'm a Terminator or something. And despite you know, reaching almost total system failure, he keeps trying to accomplish his mission, you know.
Locals in a small suburb of Plymouth, England, were traumatised in 2021 when an active shooter went on a rampage, turning the gun on 5 people before finally taking his own life. Jake Davison was a troubled young man with difficulty controlling his emotions, and yet he'd been able to obtain a firearm legally. Not only was the event, referred to simply as the Plymouth Shooting, devastating to the city of Plymouth, leaving a trail of terror and heartbreak in its wake, but Davison's ability to access a gun led to much criticism, pushback, and outrage by citizens who felt that the police and gun laws had not done their job effectively. But who exactly was Jake Davison, and how was he able to legally obtain a firearm? In this documentary, we aim to shed light on these questions and more as we examine the horrific case of Jake Davison and the Plymouth Shooting. On August 12, 2021, 22-year-old Jake Davison arrived home from his job as an apprentice crane operator, having clocked out at around 3 p.m. His neighbour's CCTV camera captured him entering 17 Biddick Drive, the home he shared with his mother in the Kiam area of Plymouth, still wearing his high-vis work vest. For several hours, all was quiet in the home. Davison's mother, 51-year-old Maxine, left the residence for a dental appointment at around 5:20 p.m, but she soon discovered that she'd gotten her dates mixed up, and she returned home around 15 minutes later. At some point after getting back, Maxine had an argument with her son, during which Davison grabbed her by the throat and refused to let her out of one of the bedrooms. At 6:05 p.m, Maxine was heard from for the last time by her sister, Marlene Hill, whom she called in panic about her son. It was Marlene who subsequently called the police, but unbeknownst to her, it was already too late. After the phone call, between 6:05 and 6:08 p.m, Davison shot his mother twice with a pump-action shotgun. Neighbours would later recall being startled by the sound of 2 loud bangs. After killing his mother, Davison left the residence. Just 1 minute later, 3-year-old Sophie Martin and her 43-year-old father Lee entered Biddick Drive, having just walked along nearby Snaky Path. They became Davison's next 2 victims. At 6:12 p.m, Maxine's sister Marlene finally got through to emergency services. she told the dispatcher, "Just had a call from my sister. Son has mental health, locked her in a bedroom, grabbed her by the throat. He's not letting her out." Before long, dispatchers began receiving further disturbing reports emerging from Biddick Drive, with one witness claiming that a man had shot someone and was walking back, pumping his gun. Another caller claimed, "He's at the back of Biddick Drive, shooting other people. It's definitely an automatic weapon because he's firing all the time." When asked, "Like an AK-47, the witness responded, "Yeah, that's it. His front door's open. He may have killed his mother. He's a massive bloke. Got a beard." Calls from terrified locals continued to pour in. One witness entered the park at nearby Royal Navy Avenue, but fled when they saw Davison walking around with the shotgun. While these calls were ongoing, Davison continued to prowl Biddick Drive, looking for his next target before moving on to Royal Navy Avenue. He would soon shoot through the front window of a neighbouring house, injuring a 53-year-old woman and her 33-year-old son, before he was seen walking up Royal Navy Avenue, where he shot and killed 59-year-old Stephen Washington, who was walking his two dogs. Afterwards, Davison was witnessed walking towards Henderson Place carrying the firearm, with surveillance footage capturing him moving down the street. At 6:13 p.m, 66-year-old Katie Shepherd headed up Henderson Place, and while passing a hair salon, she was shot and fatally wounded. According to one report, Davison told a passerby that there was nothing to worry about, mate. David was next seen walking into Bedford Street, where further CCTV recorded him heading towards a nearby parking garage, where he reportedly verbally threatened members of the public but did not injure or kill anyone at this time, and left without shooting. Heading back to Henderson Place, he reportedly had only 2 cartridges left. Meanwhile, back at Henderson Place, a passerby called emergency services after discovering Katie Shepherd when the sound of gunfire had rung out. At 6:16 p.m, 2 unarmed police officers, PC Printer and PC Temple, arrived at the scene and began to give first aid to Katie. Shortly afterwards, an ambulance arrived. At 6:22 p.m, Davison appeared back at Henderson Place. Chillingly, the dash cam of the ambulance showed the shooter with his gun beneath his chin. Another 2 unarmed police officers arrived on the scene shortly after this. The body cam footage from PC Printer showed him calling out to Davison in an attempt to stop him from taking his own life, but Davison did so anyway at 6:23 p.m. Shortly before killing himself, Davison was described as walking like he was on patrol, like a soldier with a gun, and that he had a blank expression on his face. Kate Shepherd later died in Derriford Hospital, but the mother and son who were shot through their window were treated for their injuries and survived. The scenes of the remaining murders were cordoned off by police officers who labelled them serious firearm incidents. The shooting was reported by the police to be contained at 9:25 p.m. Jake Davison was born on August 21st, 1998 in Plymouth to Maxine and Mark Davison. The couple had lived on the island of Shetland during the 1990s, where their 2 previous children, Zoe and Josh, were born, but they returned to England sometime before Davison's birth. He regularly visited the island to spend time with his extended family there. A source who spoke with the Daily Record stated that it was well known that Davison had suffered from mental health issues since childhood. Reportedly, Davison was estranged from his father, Mark, at the time of the shootings and had been for some time, with the media reporting that Mark had issues with violence, alcoholism and criminal behaviour. In 2010, he was fined £600 in court for racially abusing a bus passenger. He was travelling to England for a fishing job and consumed a bottle of alcohol on the trip while hiding in the toilet. When he was asked to exit the bathroom, Mark pushed the bus driver and hurled racial slurs at the other passenger. In 2014, however, Mark's criminal record seemed to grow exponentially when he was spared jail time after headbutting a dog walker and imprisoned for assaulting another man during a street brawl. Furthermore, he was sentenced to 8 months in prison following an assault on a fellow fisherman, which involved him biting the victim in the cheek, quote, like an animal that holds onto its prey. The event took place on a scallop fishing boat named King Explorer, while it was 30 miles from Scalloway in Shetland. Mark had gotten into an argument with a younger crew member before he punched the victim and then, quote, attached himself to the man's cheek and would not let go. Mark claimed that he felt isolated because he was the only British man amongst a crew of Polish workers. As a young boy, Davison was diagnosed with both autism and ADHD, and he attended Mount Tamar School for special needs children. His father described him as a person who was often in his own world and struggled to show his emotions. Even while in primary school, worries about Davison's behaviour were well discussed by his family and teachers, especially when, at the age of 10, he reportedly hit a classmate so hard that he broke his own wrist. Staff for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service also claimed that Davison had been playing violent video games from a young age and was struggling to separate fact from fiction. Teachers who worked with Davison in his youth tend to have mixed feelings about him. Some believed he was funny, intelligent, and very well liked, while others were worried about his interest in guns and his problem with anger. One former teacher, Jonathan Williams, later told The Telegraph that Davison would have had an education healthcare plan which would have involved him being monitored by authorities until he was 25. In the aftermath of the shooting, he stated, "Someone simply didn't do their homework on the firearm certificate issue. The so-called multi-agency approach to safeguarding appears to have failed catastrophically, unless it is somehow reasonable that a police officer read and understood a detailed history of OCD, anger issues, depression, and other associated conditions, and then decide that the same applicant should be allowed to own a firearm." Around the ages of 13 and 14, in a review with a mental health guidance counselling organisation named Careers Southwest, Davison was described as loving guns. The review noted he wants to join a gun club. Much of the review was taken up talking about how to get involved with guns. We suggested Army cadets. Other media reports, including articles by the BBC, state that he had ambitions in his youth to become a sniper. Though no great amount of details are documented online about Davison's childhood, it seems that his interest in firearms was very pervasive, following him into adulthood to the point that it concerned his mother. In 2016, when Davison would have been 18 years old, his mother called Careers Southwest because her son was very isolated and she was worried about his all-consuming obsession with weapons. The following month, Davison himself told Careers Southwest that his real passion was firearms and he discussed wanting to work in a shop which sold them. An employee with the program spoke with their manager about the situation, as they were worried that they may have to make a prevent referral about Davison. Prevent referrals are reports concerning individuals who may be at risk of radicalization into supporting or carrying out terrorism, but the employee's manager believed there was no evidence that Davison was talking with people who could take advantage of him, and therefore no referral was ever made. 2016 was an intense year for Davison by all accounts. As well as his mother's growing concern about his fascination with guns, he also came to the attention of the police when he attacked a man named Scott Hobbs without provocation while inside a supermarket. He reportedly pushed Hobbs to the ground before repeatedly hitting him in the head and then attacking his pregnant girlfriend. The next day, the two encountered one another again, and Davison reportedly threatened to shoot Hobbs. Though Hobbs went to the police, he claimed that officers didn't seem to be taking it very seriously. While authorities spoke with Davison, he was not arrested or charged, simply given a warning. Hobbs said police told him there was nothing to worry about. As well as having a strong interest in firearms, Davison was also known to frequent incel chat forums. Incel is short for involuntary celibate, and is a name used to describe men who wish to have sexual relationships, but for one reason or another are unable to. Laura Bates, who researched incel culture for her book Men Who Hate Women, told The Guardian, in other words, they're not having sex and they want to be. They see women as completely commodified and dehumanized sex objects that are purely for male sexual pleasure, and they blame women for the fact that they're not having sex. Incels often feel entitled to sex with women, whom they refer to as females or femoids, in order to dehumanize them further. Within the wider incel community, however, there are small groups with slightly differing viewpoints. Some of those groups believe they can improve their appeal to women by becoming physically fit or improving their appearance in some way. These groups often use terms like looks maxing or gym maxing. These men are considered to be red-pilled, a term generally used to describe people who have awakened or shifted to a new belief or set of beliefs. According to the anti-hate group, the Anti-Defamation League, being red-pilled does not necessarily indicate a move towards extremism, adding that it can be as basic as a Democrat becoming a Republican, or as radical as someone coming to believe that Jews control the world or that feminism is destroying the West. In terms of the incel red pill specifically, many of these men believe that they will never be desirable and therefore will never find sexual fulfillment and happiness. They believe that 80% of women desire only 20% of men, leaving the remaining 80% of men without partners. They also usually dislike feminism, which, according to them, has caused a shift in power. Feminism has allowed women to live without the need for men, and therefore allowed them to sleep with whoever they wish, as opposed to those who can provide for them. Then there are the individuals who consider themselves as part of the black pill movement. These men often have a very bleak and defeatist worldview, convinced that nothing can change the systems in place, but believe that they are the only people who see the world for what it really is. Violence against women is rampant across most spheres of incel culture, but particularly prevalent in black pill movements. As opposed to the more optimistic red-pilled individuals who believe they can improve their looks, black-pilled men believe their attractiveness is dictated by genetics and that if they aren't born handsome, then there is no hope for them. The most notable example of a black-pilled person is probably the incel shooter Elliot Rodger. Though he did not describe himself as black-pilled, he showed numerous traits of what we would refer to today as somebody who has been black-pilled. For example, he believed that changing the system was impossible and that death and violence were inevitable. Some black-pilled communities online state that going ER, a reference to Rodger, is one of the few opportunities they have. Laura Bates said of black-pilled groups, they actively incite what they describe as incel uprising or a day of rebellion, where they will go offline and massacre women. This is not a generally nice supportive community of lonely men with a few people inciting violence. It is a community specifically focused on and obsessed with inflicting violence on women. Davison, by all accounts, seemed to identify the most with the black pill section of the incel sphere. Under the username Professor Waffle, he uploaded videos to YouTube which saw him reference inceldom, the black pill point of view, and nihilism. In his final video posted to the channel, he stated that, for the most part, it's just been me against the world, that he had been beaten down and defeated by life, and that he wouldn't clarify myself as an incel, but have talked to people similar to me who have had nothing but themselves. Though he claimed to not identify as an incel, Davison spouted misogynistic rhetoric online. He discussed at one point missing out on a teenage romance and referred to certain men as chads, an incel term used to describe men who they deem to be attractive, confident, and sexually active. They are often the 20% of men whom 80% of women supposedly desire. In one rant he stated, maybe the business owner might go bankrupt twice, but guess what? He had a wife and kids to support him. Does the incel or virgin get that? No, Imagine failing at everything in life and having absolutely no support whatsoever. Furthermore, Davison clearly had deep feelings of entitlement about what the world owed him, as at one point he stated in a video, "It's just been me fighting an uphill battle with a big fucking rock on my back. Seeing motherfuckers that don't deserve half of anything now, they're getting a free ride to the top." Davison also believed himself to be so ugly that he could not improve his situation, though he had reportedly started working out several years before his death. His belongings had reportedly taken over the house, as he had his own bedroom, an office with his computer in it, and he'd set up his gym equipment in the living room. His mother's ex-boyfriend, who'd lived with the family for a short time, reported seeing Davison using anabolic steroids, which are illegal in the UK. His diet largely consisted of protein supplements and energy drinks. An active member of the forum website Reddit, where communities often gathered to discuss shared interests, Davison spent much of his time talking online with fellow gun enthusiasts. However, his account was suspended one day before the shooting after he was found to have been harassing a 16-year-old girl. The girl, based in America, had been friendly with Davison after they met through the website, but the relationship broke down when he began to hassle her by repeatedly asking to have sex with her. The girl stated in her complaints that he often asked her to date him, travel to see him, and have sex with him. He reportedly made comments that the age of consent in the UK is 16. She described his comments as creepy and paedophilic, and told him that he shouldn't message minors. Though she was encouraged by other Reddit users to go to the police, she ultimately didn't, in part because her mother had instructed her not to get involved. An article from The Telegraph states that the girls shared part of their conversation publicly, in which Davison described finding 16 and 17-year-old girls attractive and went into explicit detail about what he would do if he was dating someone of that age. Davison was also known to discuss his deep hatred for his own mother, Maxine, who he described as being vile, dysfunctional, chaotic, and rallied against single mothers in various rants. He claimed that a more recent dispute he'd had with Maxine involved the benefit money they received from the government because of his autism. In July 2021, just a month before the shootings, he wrote, "Luckily, I got PIP money because I legit have autism, which I should have taken from my mother at 18 years old really. But like an idiot, she manipulated and guilt-tripped me in letting her have it, until at 22, I decided enough is enough, and I took it from her." His relationship with his mother had, by all accounts, broken down in recent months. Family members reported that the pair argued frequently about Davison's misogynistic views, and even neighbours noticed the friction between them, with one stating, "Maxine and Jake used to be so close. You'd always see him helping her with the shopping at Lidl, but they started to clash a lot." Jake was very quiet growing up. He was a troubled soul. He got into guns and he knew everything there was to know about them. Another ex-partner of Maxine's recalled that her son treated her like a slave and that they had many blazing rows, several of which ended with Davison punching holes in walls around the house. Social media posts from several years earlier indicated that Davison was a supporter of the Libertarian Party in the UK, a fan of former US President Donald Trump, and a defender of the US Second Amendment, better known as the right to bear arms. In the days leading up to the shooting, he reportedly liked a YouTube video of men shooting rifles at targets and researched information about infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. Davison was 19 when he applied for a shotgun license in 2017. On his paperwork, he disclosed that he was autistic and had ADHD, and when firearms inquiry officers ran background checks, they discovered that he'd assaulted 2 teachers and 1 fellow student during his time at Mount Tamar School. Despite the police also being aware of an alleged altercation with his father in 2015 and the assault on Scott Hobbs in the supermarket in 2016, these incidents were not considered when Davison made his application. During the inquest, which took place after the shooting, Firearms Inquiry Officer David Reese, who handled Davison's license, was questioned. He stated that he had nothing I would describe as training for his position and mentioned that he had met with Davison in person and took his word that he wanted a shotgun for clay pigeon shooting. It's worth noting that the pump-action shotgun Davison purchased with his license was not the style used for such an activity. Firearm Inquiry Officer Reese also believed Davison when he claimed that he had no history of mental illness. One of Davison's former teachers acted as a referee for him and described him as likable and that he had a good attitude and an acknowledged interest in sporting guns, noting that this interest did not concern her whatsoever. Furthermore, Davison's GP was fully supportive of him obtaining a shotgun according to some reports, though other reports note that the GP responded with a standard reply, meaning he had no further information to add. After all of this, Firearm Inquiry Officer Reese concluded that Davison was of very low risk, and he was given a license in January 2018. Interestingly, Davison's estranged father claims to have spoken with the police about the decision to allow him a firearm in 2017. Even though he wasn't around Davison much, he seemed worried about what his son was capable of when equipped with a weapon. Davison lost his license again in December 2020 when he participated in a brutal attack at a Plymouth skate park. The assault against a 16-year-old boy was described as ferocious, intense, and unprovoked, and involved him punching and kicking the teen 9 times in the head. When a 15-year-old girl attempted to intervene, Davison slapped her, spat at her, and screamed, "I fucking hate women." He would later claim that he was having a bad day, and that's why he'd struck out at the youths, whom he claimed had called him fat. Since he had no previous convictions, he was sent to an anger management course and given no other punishment. However, the inquest uncovered that the authorities had been under pressure to not send further cases to an overloaded court system, which was sitting through a backlog due to COVID-19. A further failure was noted when Detective Constable Pablo Beckhurst was found to have failed to spot a firearms marker on the police national computer, which led to a delay in law enforcement alerting the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit to his recent crime. Many officials have pointed out that had Davison been charged with assault at this time, he would have wound up in court and lost his license and his gun, preventing this tragedy in its entirety. Though his license was finally stripped from him, FEO David Reese reviewed the case again and continued to believe that Davison's risk of harm was low, although he expected that a senior colleague would make the final decision on the case. This didn't happen, however, and Davison's shotgun was returned to him in July 2021, just 5 weeks before the massacre. Around this same time, his mother had become increasingly worried about her son's erratic and violent behaviour. Maxine is said to have begged local mental health services for help, but was told they were too busy to deal with her situation. The 5-week inquest carried out following the shooting resulted in jurors stating that the victim's death were caused by the fact the perpetrator had a legally held shotgun. On the back of this, the Independent Office for Police Conduct said a criminal investigation into the possible health and safety breaches by Devon and Cornwall Police was underway. A new Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police, Will Kerr, was implemented in December 2022. Kerr stated, "I accept Devon and Cornwall Police has failed our communities in regard to Jake Davison, but had there been clearer national guidance, direction and specific legislation concerning firearms licensing, decision-making locally may well have been very different." He also stated that the police had allocated £4 million to the Firearms and Explosives Licensing Unit since August of 2021 and had increased the number of staff from 45 to 99, over double what was available at the time of the shooting. Chief Superintendent Roy Linden admitted there had been a series of problems with the unit, from budgetary pressures to a reduced number of staff to IT issues and what was termed a cultural problem in which employees are too tolerant of risk. Despite these attempts to improve public image, Many were still angry with the police for allowing an unstable figure like Davison to obtain a shotgun license with no pushback or questions. A Labour MP for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport claimed that UK gun licensing systems were not fit for purpose. He stated, "The inquest has found the failings are systemic and so deep-rooted. The confidence that the public should have in the police to keep us safe, to license firearms correctly, is absent. The inquest might have concluded, but the pain people still feel is very real." Meanwhile, the families of the victims also criticised the system, describing the massacre as an act of pure evil, and stating, "However, we now know that this evil act was facilitated and enabled by a series of failings and incompetence from the people and organisations that are supposed to keep us safe." They then added, "It is beyond us how Davison, a man with a known history of violence, mental health issues, and with no real need to own a firearm, was granted a license to possess a gun in the first place." In 2023, a Sky News report stated that the Independent Office for Police Conduct had made a series of recommendations to Devon and Cornwall Police, as well as to the Home Office, in an attempt to strengthen firearms licensing controls. No staff were let go for their part in the mishandling of the case, though one received a written warning and another officer retired in 2021 and thus cannot face disciplinary action. Furthermore, the National Police Chiefs Council announced that a national programme would be introduced by 2024. The programme seeks to properly train firearm inquiry officers and had been recommended almost 3 decades earlier in 1996, following the Dunblane massacre, but had never been implemented. Following the shooting, Davison's social media accounts were removed from Facebook and YouTube. His father told the BBC that he was sorry and ashamed of his son's actions. The Plymouth shooting is considered one of the worst mass shootings in British history. In their statement following the inquiry, the families of Sophie and Lee Martin, Stephen Washington and Kate Shepherd observed, "Warning signs were ignored, and a license to kill was granted."